A routine film shoot on firefighters takes a horrific turn when they encounter a feral old woman in a building, triggering a quarantine and a battle for survival. Angela Vidal, with cameraman Scott Percival, is featuring firefighters in the latest episode of Night Shift. She interviews Bob Orton, chief of the fire department, and he mentions that firefighters frequently respond to medical emergencies in addition to fires. After the interview, Bob takes Angela and Scott on a brief tour of the fire station and introduces them to Jake and George, the firemen they will be shadowing for the episode. They give Angela a more in-depth look at the different amenities and areas of the station. However, as they reach the sleeping quarters, the emergency alarm suddenly blares, interrupting them. Angela is excited to catch the emergency on video. The crew accompanies the firemen in their response, and riding in a fire truck reminds Angela that she wanted to be a firefighter when she was younger. Upon arrival at the scene, Yuri Ivanov, the landlord, escorts them in. James McCready, a responding police officer, guides the firemen to Miss Espinosa's room and informs them that she's a recluse whose screaming had terrified the tenants. After unsuccessful attempts at getting the woman to open her door, Jake forces it open. The group enters the dimly lit room where Miss Espinosa is frozen in fear and muttering to herself. As Scott turns on his light to get a better view, the authorities quickly order him to turn it off as it agitates the old woman. James advises his partner Danny Walensky to put on gloves after noticing that Miss Espinosa is bloody and foaming at the mouth. They try to calm her down and inform her that an ambulance is on its way, but she suddenly charges at James, biting his neck. The men quickly subdue the rabid woman and rush James downstairs, leaving George behind with her. The situation takes a turn for the worse as the crew and the first responders realize that the building has been barricaded from the outside, leaving them trapped with no way to get aid for the injured officer. Lawrence, a veterinarian, assists with first aid while Danny frantically calls for assistance. Panic sets in as the group can't comprehend why they're unable to leave the building. They hear an announcement from outside, instructing them to follow the authorities' orders, but it offers no useful information, adding to their distress. Amid the chaos, Danny vents his frustration on the camera, adding to the tension. Lawrence draws attention to the injured officer, and Jake rallies the tenants, emphasizing the need to get the wounded to a hospital. Realizing they are trapped, Jake asks if there are any other exits in the building. Yuri suggests using the fabric workshop's entrance. Suddenly, George plummets from the upper floor with a loud thud. Jake rushes to his friend's side and checks for a pulse, relieved to find one. Lawrence is called over to tend to George while Jake and Danny head back up to investigate. The reporters are instructed to stay put. Despite the instructions, Angela follows Jake and Danny back up the stairs. Peeking into Miss Espinosa's room, she witnesses the cleaning lady barreling into a table and collapsing. As the fireman pronounces the woman dead, Danny ushers Angela and the others out of the room. Suddenly, a bloodied Miss Espinosa charges at them, forcing the officer to shoot. Flustered, he repeatedly confirms that she was attacking them, justifying his actions. As the first responders leave, the reporters are left behind, and Angela lingers in Miss Espinosa's hallway, trying to process what just happened. Sadie, an opera student, appears and asks about the commotion. Angela accompanies her downstairs to the other residents. Later, Jake goes door to door, gathering all the residents in the atrium. He first knocks on Randy's door, who is drunk, and then on an ethnic couple's room, Jahir and Nadif. When Jake knocks on another door, it swings open. Seeing the tenant's complexion, Jake deems her sick and asks Angela to help in carrying her downstairs. Behind them, a rat charges at Scott, and he stomps on it in surprise. Upon seeing Elise's condition, the other tenants become worried. They set her down, and Lawrence reports that George needs to be taken to a hospital soon or he will die. Hearing this, Jake heads for the fabric workshop despite Danny's attempt to stop him. When Jake attempts to force his way out, Danny radios it in. However, the authorities with weapons drawn warn him to stay inside. The trapped then watch in horror as the authorities proceed to board up the windows, preventing any attempts to escape. Confused and scared, everyone inside the building is at a loss upon hearing the announcement that all exits have been sealed. Later, Angela eavesdrops on Jake's phone call and learns that their situation is deemed a BNC. Soon, they realize that they are unable to receive any reception or internet. When the reporter asks about the BNC classification, the fireman reluctantly reveals that it means they are facing a biological emergency, causing more worry among the residents. Kathy is particularly concerned as her daughter Brianna has a fever and needs medicine. In the midst of the chaos, the landlord tells Jake that they may be able to escape through an office window on the second floor. Jake and Yuri cautiously make their way to the window, but before they can attempt to leave, armed soldiers intervene and seal off the windows, leaving the residents desperate for answers. Shortly after, Danny enters the room and Jake confronts him, accusing him of withholding information. Tensions rise and the officer draws his gun, causing everyone to back off. However, he quickly lowers it, explaining that he has no idea what's happening either. Realizing their mistake, the group apologizes and tries to calm down. They return to the atrium, where Angela resumes her reporting while Lawrence tends to the injured by turning the workshop into a makeshift ward. Angela interviews Lawrence, who updates her on the condition of the two injured men, stating that they have both lost a significant amount of blood, and George has multiple broken bones. The vet expresses his surprise that an elderly woman was capable of such damage. In another interview, Angela speaks with Brianna, who reveals that she's been sick for some time and that her dog Max was also recently taken to the vet. As Angela continues to interview other residents, George walks into the atrium causing panic. Lawrence sedates the injured firefighter, and they bring him back to the makeshift ward. There, Lawrence explains that all of the incapacitated individuals are showing symptoms of rabies, but he's surprised that the symptoms are manifesting so rapidly. He also informs them that rabies is only communicable if it enters the bloodstream through bites and scratches, and once symptoms appear, death follows soon after. Furthermore, there is no cure for it. As they leave the ward, Randy tries to return to his apartment, but Danny stops him, causing a heated argument. Meanwhile, Angela follows Bernard, Sadie's mentor, and Sadie as they slip away back to their room. They ascend a flight of stairs and exit into the second-floor lobby, but a rabid dog blocks their path. While thinking of a plan, the elevator opens and Randy walks out, drawing its attention. Unfortunately, the dog viciously attacks the drunk, who stumbles back into the elevator, screaming as the dog mauls him. Helpless, they leave Randy behind and rush to Bernard and Sadie's room. They switch on the old TV to tune into the news and discover that the CDC is about to enter the building. However, right before the CDC enters the building, power is cut, plunging the building into darkness. Moments later, they hear growling inside the room. Scott turns on his light and sees the infected Elise about to attack. He repeatedly bludgeons the infected woman with his camera until she's subdued. Angela, concerned about the infected blood, takes off her cardigan as the cameraman cleans his lens. Despite feeling overwhelmed by what just happened, Scott tries to stay composed and the reporter comforts her shaken coworker. Later, Danny announces that the CDC will be entering the building to administer tests, and after they pass, they will be released. Lawrence is skeptical, arguing that simple tests won't be enough because the only way to check for rabies is through a brain sample. This raises everyone's concern once more, but Jake takes charge and asks for a head count. The residents call out their room numbers until they reach the ethnic couple. Lawrence speaks for the two, reporting that their father was left inside. Danny asks if anyone lives in the attic, and the landlord informs him that it's rented but it's been unoccupied for months. The officer then inquires if anyone else could be in the apartment, and Yuri remembers that the cleaning lady was on duty today. Jake then discloses that she has already passed away. Soon after, the CDC team arrives, accompanied by an armed guard who demands that Scott stop filming. The cameraman pretends to turn off the camera while Danny reports on the situation. The CDC doctor then asks to be taken to see the injured. Angela then tries to sneak a peek but is caught by the first responders. Undeterred, they move to the adjoining room and film through a gap in the wall. As Scott films, he narrates to the reporter what's happening. George is given a shot, and the doctor then proceeds to drill into his skull for a brain sample. It becomes clear to Scott that Lawrence's suspicion was correct. The CDC is suspecting a type of rabies outbreak. The infected firefighter suddenly sits up and attacks one of the doctors, causing panic and chaos as everyone flees. In the commotion, the veterinarian is left behind, but as Jake attempts to open the door, the surviving CDC doctor thwarts him, insisting that they need to contain the outbreak. Moments later, blood splurts onto the glass door before breaking, and everyone scrambles back to the atrium, leaving the injured behind. There, Jake confronts the doctor, who finally reveals that a sick dog named Max, who lived in the apartment, had started attacking other animals in a clinic. Soon after, the injured animals began exhibiting symptoms similar to rabies. Hearing this, the group turns their attention to Kathy and Brianna. The mother assures them that her daughter only has a fever, but the CDC CDC doctor requests to check Brianna's saliva. However, when the mother starts backing away, the sick girl suddenly attacks her and runs upstairs. Despite being attacked, Kathy manages to shout at her daughter to run for safety. The group subdues the agitated mother and cuffs her to the stairs. Jawahir expresses her fear for her father's safety with the infected girl upstairs. The CDC doctor hands Jake a syringe to use on Brianna and orders Danny to bring everyone down to the atrium. Despite the mother's hysterics, the first responders go to fetch Brianna and the old man. They first check Miss Espinosa's room but find her missing. Angela then spots Brianna hiding in a corner. Danny approaches the child and she quickly latches onto him. Having been bitten, the officer orders everyone to run as he holds off Brianna. Suddenly, Miss Espinosa appears from one of the corners and Jake strikes her with his hammer. They dash for the atrium but encounter the rest of the residents running in panic, warning them about the infected escaping. They manage to reach the atrium just in time to prevent Lawrence from squeezing through the metal shutters. However, the CDC doctor abandons them, and they soon give up on containing the infected. Angela tries to free Kathy, but leaves her behind as the infected rush out of the workshop. The survivors barricade themselves in one of the rooms, where they assess each other for any signs of being bitten. Everyone responds quickly, except for Sadie, who takes a while to answer. Then Angela starts having a mental breakdown. Jake is unnerved, knowing the building is now crawling with infected people. As Angela rambles that they're all going to die, a voice from the corner of the room agrees. Jake investigates the voice and finds the CDC doctor. He expresses his frustration, knowing that the doctor deserted them as they were trying to contain the infected. When Jake realizes that the deserter is bitten, he retreats and isolates him, though aware that glass doors won't hold him back once he turns. Then Angela points out that Sadie is bleeding. Frightened, Sadie stammers in response. Yuri declares that she must be killed, prompting Bernard to jump to her defense. In desperation, Bernard tears open the window and is shot almost immediately. Because of this, the rest of the group hides to avoid getting shot. Yuri then recalls an alternate escape route via a basement drain that connects to the sewers. However, before he can mention where the key to unlock it is, the infected doctor attacks him. In a matter of seconds, Sadie turns rabid as well. The others urge Wanda to join them in fleeing, but she refuses to leave her husband. Scott, Jake, and Angela exit the room and close the door, but they realize they don't know where Yuri's room is. The group rushes to the mailboxes, with Jake stomping a feral Nadif along the way and discovers that Yuri lives on the 3rd floor. Jake recommends taking the elevator, as it still functions on auxiliary power. They wait for the elevator, and as it opens, Jake quickly dispatches a rabid dog within. They step into the elevator, narrowly avoiding the rabid Kathy, and just as the doors begin to close, James tries to force his way in. Jake fights him off and they ascend to the 2nd floor. Angela frantically presses the button to close the doors as the fireman stands ready to fend off any attackers. Suddenly, Sadie rushes in, but Jake manages to keep her away from the reporter. The infected student is pummeled by the fireman as Angela stumbles out of the elevator. Satisfied that the feral student has been disabled, Jake races up the stairs ahead of the others. However, Sadie is relentless and tackles Angela. Scott sets the camera down and aids the fireman in defending his friend. After a sickening sound of bones breaking, Sadie is permanently disabled. Scott comforts the shaken reporter, and they continue on to Yuri's room. Unexpectedly, Jawahir appears out of nowhere and attacks the cameraman, but Jake quickly shoves the woman off the railing. They finally reach the apartment room just as Lawrence emerges from around the corner. Jake wrestles the infected veterinarian while Angela searches for the key and Scott provides light. She finds the keyring and Jake prepares them for their dash to the basement. Upon opening the door, the fireman is caught off guard by Yuri. With multiple infected on the floors below, Scott and Angela are forced to flee up the stairs, leaving Jake behind. The infected Danny continues to pursue them as they climb higher. They manage to open the attic door just in time to avoid the officer's attack. The infected bang on the door, but soon give up. Scott assures Angela that the room is safe since it was locked. Inside, they find multiple cages of rats and news clippings about a virus engineered by a cult. Then they find a tape recorder, which plays an ominous, distorted voice. While searching for a way out, they accidentally stumble upon a trap door. Scott uses the camera to investigate the hidden room, but it's hit by an infected boy who breaks the light. The cameraman is forced to use night vision and takes the lead. Soon after, an infected man wanders in and starts trashing the place. The duo tries not to alert him of their presence in the darkness, cautiously avoiding him as they search for an exit. Scott tries to sneak past the old man but accidentally hits something, alerting the infected who attacks him. Angela staggers staggers back in shock and picks up the camera, whimpering as she witnesses her friend's demise. The noise draws the attention of the infected towards her, and she is attacked too. Angela drops the camera, but fortunately she's not bitten. As she crawls towards the camera, something pulls her into the darkness, and the reporter disappears from view.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.